remember to buy a copy of your favorite books from the Cheeky Merchants. If we don't have it, we'll source it for you, but we'll definitely find the book for you.
Hello, Cheeky Natives. Welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. I am so excited for today. I feel like I need a new intro because I say I'm so excited for today's episode with every episode, but it's actually not my fault that the Cheeky Natives has just been interviewing the most amazing guests. So it is what it is. Let's have another. How are you?
We're going to talk to my fave, who's also my friend, so I'm excited. Our friend, so that's really exciting. And so I want to put a disclaimer. Oftentimes when I talk to my friends, I want to be like, no, they really are excellent people. I am biased because they are my friends, but they are excellent. And you'll know why when Alma introduces our friend in a moment.
Sure. So I have the privilege of introducing our friend and guest today, Prof. Barbara Boswell, a writer and scholar from Cape Town, a city which inspires most of her fiction. She's an associate professor of English literary studies at the University of Cape Town and is the author of Grace, one of my favorite novels ever, which won the UJ Prize for debut creative writing. And I wrote my story anyway. Black South African women's novels as feminism, and Loretta Noble writing as the practice of freedom. Her latest book is called The Comrade's Wife. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. You are my favorites also. It's great to be on your podcast. I love talking to you.
I do this all the time, right? I jokingly call you Prof, and I know you don't like me calling you Prof. And so I just want to be like, Prof. I wanted to start a little bit differently because we normally ask our to read at the end of the podcast rather at the beginning. But I thought the beginning of this book draws you in, and I wanted you to just draw us in as we begin the conversation.
No matter how I try to change it, the story always starts like this, with his devotion. When I think about him now, after all this time, the word that still best describes him is devoted. It's what comes out first on every page I draw close to write his story, our story. Stories so intertwined that they become one. The work of untangling them, of taking my story back, so that it once again belongs to me, is the impulse that drives me to that blank page in an attempt to write, rewrite, recast. And because that word won't leave, let me accept it and start with a simple statement. My husband is the most devoted person I know. He's fastidiously committed to duty, his family, his comrades, his country, is equally devoted to caring for me, to making me happy.
My husband is the most devoted person I know. This husband.
Ooh, this book, I just want to say, Anita, the whole time I was reading this book, I was like, Anita, honey, I'm going to hold your hand when I say the entire book, right? And I think there's some interesting things that happen in this book, right? But there's a few questions I have before we go the actual characters, and we can talk about Anita and why Anita put me through so many things. But I think a lot about how you use intimate relationships in this book as allegory. So I think about how we often talk about how the personal is political, but you make a very pointed decision in this book to use romantic relationships as a allegory. So we think about the role of politics, romance, self-esteem, and I wanted to talk a little bit about why you wanted to use the romantic relationship in this book as an allegory.
Thank you for that. I wanted to write about power. Power is everywhere. It's all around us. It's in all our relationships. It's in all our interactions, in all our institutions. But two of the most powerful places where you can see power really manifest itself, one is in the interpersonal relationship, in a heterosexual, in this case, marriage between a man and a woman. And in the political realm, that's what we would call the brute naked power of how people do stuff and move the world and change the world. I really wanted to bring these two worlds together and show how power leaks in from one realm into the other, and what happens when powerful people use that power in different realms and what they do with that power. So this was my main objective, I think, when I was writing it.
I think often of the curse of the sophomore novel, right? Grace, as Alma has indicated, is such a wonderful story and has won the UJ debut prize for creative writing. I was interested about whether you have the sophomore curse. Were you concerned that this second novel, not to say your second book, because you've written other nonfiction books in between, but that your second novel, was there some feelings because of the success of Grace?
Yes and no. I think Grace was very successful. It really shattered what my expectations were for the book. My expectations were quite humble and lowly. I thought I really just want to write the book and publish it. I don't think it's a bestseller, but the prize is really gratifying, and to be shortlisted for numerous other prizes. Also, the impact that the book has had, that from people that have written to me and told me about how the book has impacted them personally. And that is not something that happens in the public realm. It's very personal, because people will talk about their own stories in relation to Grace. I had a wonderful experience of someone at the African Feminism Conference a few years ago, gave a paper on Grace and healing and how the book was healing to her personally. That has been the most gratifying part of this book, that a lot of people could see themselves in it and a lot of people felt somehow touched by it. With the second book, I didn't actually feel that pressure. I felt like Grace is its own world and universe. It's done and it's still doing its work out there. And in this book, I was a bit uncertain about whether, as an academic, is a romance novel, which I think this could be called amongst other things, is a good move. How will a romance novel land? And so I had no other choice really but I just continued writing, because every time I told myself I'm going to write 10,000 words, and 10,000 words in, I will know, is this a worthwhile project? But then I needed to write the whole story to see whether I liked it or not. And that's what ended up happening. So I just went along with where the story took me.
Ooh, and the story takes us places, right? We're going to talk about my girl Anita, because wow, I actually saw someone write this the other day, that desire is often the place where the failings of your politics often becomes clear, right? So it's that is the chasm between your politics and what you actually live out becomes very visible. And I think a lot about that as it relates to relationships, right? And how people's desires and desire to be desired, so desirability comes out. And we see that a lot in the relationships in this particular book. I think a lot about how Anita has her personal politics, but there's a chasm between what her personal politics are and how she lives them out. Particularly in the context of a relationship. And then I think about what the role of institutions is in determining people's ideas of what it means to be a good partner, what it means to be a good wife or good husband, and what that means when you contextualize it in the space of their flaws. The chasm between who you believe yourself to be and who you show yourself to be in the context of the institutions in which you operate.
That's such a deep question. One way of answering is saying that when we are beings who are in integrity, or believe ourselves to be acting from a place of integrity and a place of principle, often things like desire can trip us up because we're also human. And I wanted to show this with both these characters. Both of these characters have deep desires to serve, to do well, to create a better future for everyone in the country. They both profess that in how they do their work, the husband and the wife. But we see only the interior world of Anita, the woman character, the academic. And we don't know Neil's interior world because we don't have access to that. But we can see that her principles as a feminist slowly goes against them and acts against them. I do think that it's about desire, but it's also the backstory of wounding and an incomplete healing project. These are the things that make human beings human. We may want to act in a specific way, in integrity and in a principled way, but there are things that trip us up along the way. This is part of being human. This is what happens often and why we don't live in a perfect world.
We're taking a short break. We're taking a short break.
I love that, right? Because I think that for me, what the Comrade wife does is you can have all the education, intellect in your arsenal, right? But at the end of the day, you're still human and there are decisions you're going to take because you're human. I wanted to speak a little bit about the comparison between Grace and the Comrade's wife. But what I think is really fascinating for me is that both kind of books cover abuse in a type of way, right? We know that in Grace, it's a very visceral, physical type of abuse. But here, it's an abuse, on the one hand, financial, but on the other hand, also emotional. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that, why it was important for you in these intimate relationships, because even Grace is about intimate relationships, that you wanted to speak about abuse and how it impacts our lives.
It comes back to the question of power. I have found, having lived long enough now in the world, that people abuse it. People abuse their power all the time, and we live with the consequences of this abuse. I wanted to look at nationally, what does this abuse look like? And then in a personal relationship, what is this abuse like? I think we are in a kind of a moment here politically in the novel and in our country where there are just multiple abuses and we've become almost desensitized to them. So a lot of people have made the point that you make. It's almost like the one novel can pick up from where the other one left off. And yes, there are many things. I'm looking at women who are racialized as colored. I'm racialized as colored in this country. I don't necessarily identify as colored. Contemporary novels, they're novels of the post-apartheid era. This is my subject. It has chosen me as much as I've chosen it. And I feel compelled to tell certain stories, and I think the stories come and they sit with me and they stay with me. And if I don't write a particular thing, it's going to sit and nag me and I can't do anything else. And I have other books that I want to write. This idea wouldn't go away. And I really just wanted to see what the story was and how it would come out. I make the decision to write about something, but as much as I make that decision, it's like the topic also chooses me. That's the best thing I can reply to you in that way.
I think this book asks interesting questions, right? Some of the interesting questions that the book asks is around what it means to be a good person, particularly in the context of your humanities. Taking the full scope of who you are, you've not written villainous characters. It's easy to reduce Neil to maybe being a villain, but Neil in some ways can be a good person. Neil looks after the people in his community. Neil looks after his family. Neil at some point has stood on the right side of history. Anita as well. So I'm curious about what you wanted the reader to think about as it relates to being a good person in the fullness of humanity? Because that's a hard question to be asked as a reader. What is a good person?
I'm loving this question. I think it's very important to write complexity. I don't think this binary of good and bad, I think those make for very one-dimensional characters. And I want to write realistically. And I think there are very few people that are so incredibly bad that they are just irredeemably awful and must be written off as horrible human beings. And I wanted to capture that there are good people who act poorly, do bad things, or who act out of impulse and do not think things through, or can't make decisions properly, or don't have the patience to sit and think about what should I do. Like Anita's character, there are several moments in the novel where she throws something in the trash that she really shouldn't have. A more considered person would have done a more considered response. And then there's the other side, like Neil wants to serve and he purports that, and he says that all the time. He's a politician, therefore, and he wants to serve women particularly, and children and people who have been disadvantaged like him, that come from the same background as him. And I think he believes that, but has maybe lost his way a little bit. I think the characters need to be likable. At some level, we have to believe that Anita falls in love with Neil. If he's completely awful all the time, what is there to fall in love with? He has to have something that makes him attractive and interesting, and goodness is one of those things.
Yeah. I wonder if I think Neil is a good person, right? But again, it comes back to the whole point of what do you as the reader consider a good person? Because you are right. I think there is likability. In the beginning, we are all, at least I know, I'm lured into this love affair, right? And then bam, there's no roses, there's no moonlight, there's just nothing. I think one thing the book does beautifully is we often think about middle-aged women. I remember my mom in particular, like kind of didn't have friends when she got older. And I've been wondering about, your parents often say, you'll see when you grow older, you won't have that many friends. But what you do that's really beautiful in this book is to write about the importance of friendship, right? Claire and Thandiswa, for me, really seem to be beacons, really seem to be sisters, really seem to be holding Anita down. And there seems to be a growth, a real kind of reflective friendship. It's not about Instagram baddies or we take good pictures together, we go to the club together. But these people are actually like in each other's life and talking about really deep things, right? For me, the particular moment is when Claire calls Thandiswa. It's like, girl, you better rock up. Something's happening. There is not a moment of thought for her to rock up, right? And for them to sit and hold Anita. It reminded me of Adriana Rich when she writes that you can still be counted as warriors even when you're weeping, right? For me, that was Anita's kind of womanhood and badassery wasn't diminished because of what she found herself in there. I wanted to speak about that, the beautiful power of these particular friendship and sisterhood, particularly in the face of when we get to Anita. Anita's life hasn't been easy, y'all. It hasn't been easy, but these friendships for me really hold her down.
Yeah, and that was really one of the aims of having this friend circle, because they are literary devices. My own voice speaks through all three of these women. There are a lot of debates about gender roles and sex. Should a woman approach a man first in dating? And if she wants to have sex with a man, should she just go and say, I want to have sex with you? Should she let the man come to? And these are the issues that they debate. These are things that I hear a lot being spoken about. And I have a very clear idea about what I think about it. I use these different women to talk through the issues and argue with each other and have different points of view around what it means to be a sexual agent and a sexual woman in this particular moment in South Africa, and a Black woman who is sexual. I wanted them to have a very different set of views. One is a lawyer, so she has a very practical, she's like, protect your pension, girl. There are men.
Girl.
And the other one is just, let's have orgasms, because this is the thing that happens in your body when you have an orgasm. This is the chemical that is released, and so on. So all of those things are questions that I wanted to have this group discuss. And I also wanted them all to be really professional women who have come from a disadvantaged background, but have really succeeded in their arenas. And so Anita's an academic, Tandis was a psychologist and a trained traditional healer, and Claire is the lawyer. And so I wanted these really strong women characters who have succeeded in the world and are still wanting love and relationships and how they navigate that. I think that's really interesting. There is a body of literature that's growing around that about Black women's representation, but I wanted more. I think we need a huge array of different types of womanhood and representations of womanhood.
I think what I enjoyed about these women is that their friendship is also complex, right? We have space for complexity in relationships with partners, with lovers, but not for relationships between women as friends. As their friends find themselves in different stations, there is sometimes a little bit of envy, there's some jealousy, resentment. And I enjoyed the fact that the friendship remains, even in the face of their humanity. There is an honesty in the way that sometimes approaches Tandisa's advice because she knows that Tandisa feels a particular way about not having completed her master's or her exclusion from the academy in particular ways. And I thought that was interesting to see. And I think I'm curious about why you wrote almost an imperfect but a good friendship, right? Because sometimes it is infuriating to see the way in which Claire can be so businesslike in the face of all of these big emotional things. Tandisa can be very much, oh, I told you so, which is sometimes not what you need in the moments. But you have a friend who's like that. That when you tell your friend, they're going to be like, but Barbara, I told you. Also you. Also you. You know,
I like it, but I told you. I'm going to be here, but I told you.
They're going to be like, and I thought that was interesting to see in friendships, right? That these people can love each other deeply, but still be so flawed and problematic towards each other. And I wanted to know why you wanted to write a female friendship like that.
I think that relationships are interesting. These are flawed human beings, and therefore the relationships are going to be flawed. To gloss over it just isn't going to ring true. I know what it's like to have wonderful friends. You can love them and really adore them and know that they are wonderful, good, amazing people. And then sometimes they irritate you. Or you have that friend where they're like, oh my gosh, you'll never say it, but like, I can't believe she's doing this thing again that we spoke about for hours and weeks and months about how she's never going to do that again. And look, there she goes. And then you just be like, okay, obviously she just needs to do it again and learn. And I'll still be there for her to pick up the pieces. I think it's also about age. And when you get to a certain age, knowing that you have people that you can really be vulnerable with and that know you with your flaws and all. I think that's what we all are looking for in our lives as human beings, is a kind of love that sees you fully for who you are and still decides, I'm still going to stay here, whether that's romantically or friendships. That is what we as human beings want, people that can see us in all our complexity and our messiness. And when we're crying at 3 a.m., they will still be there for you. That's the kind of love I wanted to show. And that's the love they give each other. They choose each other. Just like one chooses a romantic partner, you choose your friends over and over again. You choose to remain friends with them. I think friendship is just glorious. Friendship that is sustaining and really the real deal will sustain one through everything, through a lot of what life throws at you, good and bad. I wanted to show those kinds of messinesses in friendships also.
I love
now,
that.
On to my girl, Anita. Anita's that friend that you're like, woo, Anita girl. But I think that betrayal is an important theme in this book, right? We think a lot about fidelity to others in the context of relationships. But I think a lot now that I get older about fidelity to self, right? And what does it mean to betray yourself and to betray your politics? And we see Anita come to a place where she betrays herself. And that, for me, feels like the worst betrayal in the book. And I think it's the betrayal that we struggle the most with as a reader and as a writer, is to see Anita betray herself first in small ways and then in big ways in the book. And also to talk about writing betrayal as a theme, but to put the betrayal of self at the forefront in the way that you did, and why that was such an important contrast. Because I think you understand the betrayal in terms of corruption and in terms of other people and existing outside of yourself. But the betrayal that Anita undergoes within herself is the most difficult one to.
Yeah. That's a great question. Betrayal is one of the main themes of the novel. There are multiple levels of betrayal. There are a lot of betrayals going on. And the self-betrayal, I hadn't actually looked at it in that way. I don't think I was consciously writing, oh, this is a woman that's going to betray herself. I think I wrote her as a woman who loses sight of herself and then has to decide what does she do to find herself again. But you're right, that is a kind of self-betrayal. Also the lengths that she will go to because she loves this man to justify or rationalize some of the things that he is doing. And in that process, it's not really about actively thinking about, oh, I suppose nobody goes, oh, let me betray myself. They don't think about it that way. It's self-betrayal happens when one puts someone else's interests and best interests over one's own at the expense of oneself. I think that's a good definition. And I think that just happens gradually to her as she becomes enmeshed in a kind of web that he spins around her. I wanted to show how gradually even a very strong person with very strong principles and very clear, this is what I want and this is what I don't want, can get trapped within a web of deceit and what that does to the self and what that does to a person. So that was one of the aims, but I hadn't thought about it as self-betrayal. So thank you for that insight.
It's interesting because in the moment you don't think about it as self-betrayal, but when you reflect upon it, as you reflect upon relationships and ending of relationships, you're, oh, crap, there were needs that I had that I just didn't vocalize, that I didn't feel were important at the time. And in essence, that's betraying oneself, right?
Yeah,
So we
sacrifice parts of yourself in order to keep the relationship, or maintain the peace.
I wanted to speak about the idea of a helpmate. As a conversation with Neil's mother, and Neil's mother is just like, Neil is at an age where he needs a helpmate. There is a romanticizing of the way in which women are socialized when it comes to relationships. So it felt like in many ways, what Neil's mother was doing was like placating Anita to be like, girl, don't come here with your academic, I'm a feminist, I am a professor in sociology, I know all gender, sex, No, that's not what Niels needs. Niels needs a woman because he needs to settle down in life, right? And for me, the idea of just like romanticizing the role of women in relationship as taking away their agency to be who they are. So in many ways, like Anita's mother-in-law was telling her, girl, you need to take your feminist jacket off at the door when you come in.
Door, yes.
the wife in this scenario.
I think that's such an interesting comment. I think this is a conundrum. I know a lot of feminists, and I'm myself a feminist, in romantic relationships. The role of, we are so strongly socialized as women, I think, in this country to be of service, to sacrifice for our partner, our spouse, our husband or our wife, if we're queer, and our children. It's almost as if the script of self-sacrifice is so strong. Often when you hear people talking about their mothers, especially, they're like, oh, I'm so grateful that all she sacrificed. And I've said it myself to my own mother. that I'm here where I am because you sacrificed. It's such a laudable, admirable quality. But the idea also of the helpmeet is biblical. It's in the Bible. It's in Genesis. I think Eve was made for Adam as a helpmeet. And in that instance, the man is the subject and the woman is the appendage put on earth to help him, because man cannot be alone. If you read the Genesis story, Adam and Eve, that idea within religious discourses also of women being the helper of a man, it's very strong. And then when you look at these religious ideologies and the feminist ideologies, there's a huge clash. I have been married once to a man. I have also been a partner to a woman who I lived with. We didn't get married because we couldn't legally, but we were in that kind of relationship. The idea of, yes, yeah, I'm here to help, but especially within heterosexual relationships, it can be very strongly gendered in terms of a woman being in the support role and the man is the main character and the main actor and the woman supplements. I've seen with feminists how ideologies clash and there's this, yes, I want to help, I want to do, but also what about my own thing? And who is helping me? Who is the woman's helpmeet, for example? Her helpmeets often, I've been told sometimes when you're unhappy in a heterosexual relationship, oh, but the man can't be everything. Go, that's what your friends are for. So the friends give emotional support to women, but men get the emotional support from their wives. And of course, these are gross generalizations. I'm not saying this is always the case for everyone, but these are just some of the dynamics packed into that one word, help me.
I think it's important to also contextualize who Anita is, because she doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? And I think that so many of us are collecting all the things that happen to us, particularly our traumas. And I think about Anita's first marriage, right? And I think about the status of women, particularly those who want to have children in common. And I think about how so much of women's role in this world is validated by what they can do, right, in relation to other people. Can you have children? Can you raise children? So much of your identity is then formed around other people's ideas of what womanhood and motherhood are. It's interesting that I'm saying that as somebody who is who's a parent, because it becomes so much more highlighted in that context. You get to a point in your life where people have certain expectations of you, and motherhood is one of those expectations. What does it mean to be a woman who cannot fulfill the expectation of biological motherhood? Had the roles been reversed and Anita was the one who could have children and her first husband could not, would there have been an understanding for the relationship to end in the way that it did because he could not have children and she could? And I think that first marriage is the site of so much trauma for Anita. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the ways in which that first experience of love, but also of crushing heartbreak and of not being enough, shapes how Anita moves and potentially makes her vulnerable to landing up with someone like Neil.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of literary tradition I'm drawing on in this book. In the introduction, or the passage I read at the beginning, I want to untangle our stories. I'm referring a bit to Zoe Wickham, who writes in David's story, the character Dulcie wants a man who she can lay her story next to. I'm writing with these, and the idea of compulsory motherhood is something I teach on a lot in African women's literature. Buchi Emecheta's The Joys of Motherhood. Loretta Ngobo touches on it in And They Didn't Die. There are plenty of novels where African women write about this idea of a woman. I can quote almost verbatim from The Joys of Motherhood. A woman who cannot be a mother is a failed woman. That is what the society tells her, the character in that novel. And that idea is so prevalent that if you cannot conceive a child, carry a child to term and give birth, you are an incomplete woman or a failed woman. Motherhood makes us into women in many societies. And I think this is what happens in this novel as well. There's an inability to conceive a child. And even Anita's mother says, God must be punishing you for my sins. because there's no explanation. You're such a good girl and you're doing everything right, but still you can't have that one thing. And that is a very powerful ideology in our society and in other societies as well. And it's a huge source of pain and wounding for women who are unable to do that. And also the novel by Lola Shoyanen about the secret lives. I forget the exact Baba Shaggy's wives, right? There's that situation where it's reversed. He has 4 wives and there's an infertility problem, but we don't know until very late in the novel what's actually going on. And often, even when it's men who are not fertile, the blame will accrue to a woman rather than the man. So I think I wanted to explore that as her backstory because I wanted to write a character who, even though she's intellectually astute, there's an emotional component to her, the wounding, the problem that has shaped her life and her conception of herself, how she's been told this is the kind of woman that you are, that makes her susceptible to actually falling prey to the kind of emotional abuse that eventually happens in the novel. There's this backstory of abandonment, and that trauma often leads people into situations where they will do anything to cling to love when they think they have found it. And that cycles back to the question of self-betrayal. If there's an issue with abandonment, you will betray sometimes yourself in order not to be abandoned again.
You will self-abandon, right, so that you aren't abandoned. I also wanted to talk about another aspect of Anita. She experiences violence in the academy, right? That infuriated me so much because we know it happens. The violence she experiences is twofold. One, she's treated like a postgraduate student and not a professional. And the second thing is her methods to decolonize the methodology and the academy to use ethnography as a way. It's also diminished. And then she experiences the actual also sexual harassment where this white man just decides, you know what, girl, I'm going to just touch you up. And for me, the violence that really hurt me is that when she spoke up, the person she reports to is also a woman and kind of says to her, oh, girl, but are you sure you want to do this? And I wanted to speak about that, just the violence of the academy and the ways in which Anita was at every point just treated with the utmost disregard.
Yes, that is also a big question and a big part of what the novel seeks to show. And this comes from my placement in the academy. I've been in academia since around 2001 or 2000 as a graduate student first. And I worked, when I was in the US for 10 years, I was doing my PhD and then I did postdocs. But I worked at one point at one university in a provost's office. And my task was to do research on how to retain Black professors, because there's a big assumption in the US about Black professors that you can't keep them because if they're good, they're so sought after that they often get poached and they leave. They've got a lot of mobility. And so the question is, how do we retain Black professorial staff? And the research that I was doing and looking into, also a lot of it was desk research, just reviewing the literature. It actually indicates that Black professors, and I think it's similar here also, they leave universities not because of money or status. It is because they are treated poorly and because of racism. I have experienced racism, sexism, and sexual harassment in universities in the US and in South Africa. So I have the intellectual understanding of it and then also the experiential understanding of it. And one of the factors is it's not that Anita wants to do ethnography. It's that she wants to do it around race and that she wants to do a grounded participatory methodology, which takes longer. I've seen this in multiple spaces. When you do work on race, especially on Black people or people of color in South Africa, it's often just discounted. I've seen in my own research, my own PhD was on Black women writers. I couldn't find a job for years, a permanent post, until Rhodes Must Fall happened. And then the universities were like, oh, we need to decolonize. And then my topic on Black women writers, because everyone wanted to know about Miriam Tladi and Loretta Ngobo. And so then suddenly there was interest in my research. I can tell you before that, nothing. No one cared. Everyone was like, why are you even doing this research? It's post-apartheid. We're tired of apartheid. Who wants to read about apartheid women writing under apartheid? It's boring. And that was how my work was treated. And I've seen this in other spaces as well, in social science, where people are doing research on race, especially young people. There's just be like, oh, this isn't rigorous. Or if you're doing a grounded participatory method, it's not really rigorous and it's not empirical enough and the data set is not big enough. In the field of gender and sexuality studies, where the funding is in gender-based violence and HIV prevention, or that was a few years ago when I was still about that field. I don't know where it's moved now. These are some of the barriers if you are wanting to research Black women's lives. I wanted to show how these knowledge-making enterprises are really enterprises in the very basic sense of the word, like entrepreneurial. Even at universities, I was horrified when I got to one university and they said, you need to think like an entrepreneur. And I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur. That's not what I'm here for. But that is some of the obstacles in the academy. And then, of course, there is sexual harassment. And that is something that I've also been studying. I've been on task teams looking at sexual harassment and how the policies work and what they are. At South African universities, there's a problem. Sexual harassment is a global problem in the workplace in general. But there are particular ways in which it manifests in South Africa. For example, perpetrators, they're about to get caught out, or the allegations surface and then they resign and they go to the next institution and they continue their careers there. And that's how they just keep moving from one institution to another and are never held accountable. So I have a lot to say about this topic. I have written papers about it and so they haven't been published, but I think a novel is a way of really bringing it into the consciousness of people who would not necessarily read academic papers. I'll stop there. I can go on.
I think it's an important topic to speak about. So I think about Anita and her mother. So this is a complicated relationship. Her mother loves her dearly. Someone can love you dearly but still not be equipped in the ways that you need them to be, right? Particularly for where you find yourself in the world. A lot of us are first generation. Anything, we are the first in our families to encounter particular things, encounter particular problems, and have particular options. Anita's relationship with her mother is very difficult. Anita's mother is a difficult person to really come to. And much of that makes me think about the ways in which parents project their traumas into how they raise their children. So you made reference to how she says, maybe Anita, you are struggling to have a child because this is a punishment for me. It's interesting that somebody could be experiencing something terrible and you still find a way to center yourself in their suffering. Not from a place of malice, but from a place of being emotionally ill-equipped. Think about how trauma often freezes people in particular points in their lives. So you experience a trauma at 19 or 20, and even how you think is rooted in that particular place at 19 or 20, even at 45 or even at 50. And I wanted to speak a little bit about writing difficult mother and daughter relationships and how that then frames, because that's often the first relationship that you have. The family is the first sides of the politicals, the first sides of your relations. And I think a lot about Anita and her mother's relationship and what you were hoping that the reader would get from such a difficult interaction.
That's such a hard question to answer because I'm not a writer who sits, and I know there are writers who do this. They will plot the whole novel and they'll know exactly what happens. But for me, once I had Anita and Neil in the flow of the novel and their story was unfolding, the mother appears. She's not there at the beginning. She comes in and she just took on her own life. I was just like, what kind of mother is Anita going to have? Because if Anita has a mother who says, no, this man is not treating you right, immediately that's going to be an alarm bell ringing. But the alarm bells just do not ring for Anita. And so what kind of mother will see this happening to her child and still say, no, it's not him, it's you? She's going to have a backstory that's she's going to be really patriarchal. She's going to privilege men over women, and she's going to privilege men even over her own daughter's well-being. I don't know. We worked a lot when I was with the editor, Helen Moffat. We worked a lot on that character because my own conception of a mother is just someone who is very nurturing and loving. And so this mother often, as I was writing it, would lapse into that. And Helen would say, the mother's acting out of character here. She wouldn't say something nice or affirming here. It's not like her. So you have to, once the character comes out, you have to be faithful to the character and how they would react. The backstory of Anita and her mother had to be a very particular story that allows for Anita to be caught in this web. There is a lot of messiness even in that relationship. There's a lot of damage and there's a lot of unlearning that Anita herself has to do away from her mother in order to survive. But she doesn't abandon that mother either. She's still there with her and she still takes care of her. And even in that moment at the end, when the mother is weeping, Anita's taking care of her. It is...
You know that
also, you want to make it, right? I was a very young child. My parents allowed me to watch Dallas. And I know you people don't know Dallas, but everyone loved JR because he was the most not toxic, awful person, but he was the most compelling character. Also, as a storyteller, you don't want bland Pollyannas skipping through a field of daisies. You want messy people doing messy stuff to make the story interesting.
But sometimes the people we love are messy and problematic, right?
There's not one person that I love that isn't messy. Sorry. Oh, okay, sorry. You are the exception.
People in our lives see red flags as carnivals, right? And you're just like...
Babes, Anita sees red flags as carnivals.
Anita, her mother, you understand why she thinks red flags are carnivals. Because her mom is like, take those red flags and build a home. She's like, you will sew a blanket and cover yourself with those red flags. But what you will make a home.
What's interesting for me is that Anita's relationship with her mom is juxtaposed against Neil's relationship with his mom, right? The idea of like daughters and their mothers, but mothers and their sons, right? For me, it feels like in Neil's mom's eyes, Neil is the most incredible thing. He can do nothing wrong. Like, he's just amazing. Everyone must know how amazing he is. Even his siblings are just there. We meet them, but Neil is the one sibling that did everything. And yes, we understand the context in which also Neil grew up in, the things that he had to do to care for his family. all of the sacrifices he's made and how he's built himself up. And so in many ways, Neil is the saving grace of his family. But it was interesting for me to think about the way in which Anita's mom teaches Anita to build blankets with red flags. It's the way in which Neil's mom teaches Neil to use money, power, charm to just do whatever he wants, right? He's so manipulative to everyone. His family, he manipulates with money. The constituents, he manipulates with presence and money. And he thinks that's the way of the world. And even the ladies in the harem, they also are manipulated with money, right? Even Anita is manipulated to be like, leave your job, my darling. I will take care of you. There is just this manipulation. And I think the manipulation comes from the way in which his mom raised him. Like, he's just amazing and he can do everything. And so he just shows up in this world with this confidence, but I think it's like a selfishness, right? That he can just take. Like, he's been taught that he can take because he's toiled and sacrificed so much that now
it's his turn to eat. It's his turn. So it is his time and he is going to take whatever he wants. And he is the master at orchestrating it and playing it out and manipulating people. That's exactly it. And it's interesting to note the difference between the two mothers, where the one is looking out. She's almost like his gatekeeper because she's vetting this woman and making sure, like when Anita comes to visit, she's asked, how old are you? Do you want any more children? Because Neil is not at the stage of his life where he must have any more children now. She's like a guard there protecting him and making sure that whoever comes into his life is suitable and is going to conform around his life and what he needs in a partner. Which I think, can one blame a parent for being like that? I think I'm a parent. I think we probably we want the best for our children. We want them when they grow up and we want them to have good partners. We want them to have happy lives. And I think it's just, that's how this mother operates. But Anita doesn't have that same mother. So that's the difference between them. That Anita's mother is more, Neil's mother, Neil is the prize. And Anita's mother is, because she's just internalized all of these things about womanhood and the defective womanhood of not being able to conceive a child. Anita's mother is, you would be happy if someone chose you would be lucky if someone chose you. So that's the difference between these two mothers. And yes, that kind of instinct to protect and look out for him and want him to be happy morphs into something else. And I really wrote this. There's a lot of literature around narcissism. I never wanted to use that word in the novel because I think the word is bandied about a lot these days. And so you won't find it in the book. But narcissists are made either by completely inattentive parents who didn't care for them at all, or their emotional worlds, or their safety emotionally and physically, or by parents who over praised their kids and made them feel excessively special.
Parents were like, let me hold you.
My child.
I'm so convinced there is a boy mom industrial complex. I say this as the mother of boys. There's a boy mom industrial complex.
I also like mustn't blame mothers, because that's what I got told at one of my book launches, that I'm just blaming all the mothers all the time for everything that is wrong.
The truth of the matter is,
if you are a mother like Neil's mother, maybe we must blame you, right?
A lot of psychological studies have shown that the way we show up in relationships as adults is because of our primary relationship with our primary caregiver, which is our parents. If mothers are the problem, they're the problem. If daddies be the problem, they be the problem. We're not inventing stuff.
Neil's mom is a problem. And as the mother of a boy, I think a lot about being a feminist. And what I hope that will translate into how my son will then go on to treat the people in his life. And male behavior is particularly concerning, right? So the boy-mom industrial complex needs to be studied and stopped. But I wanted to speak a little bit about the latent power, which is interesting, but the latent power that men in cis-het romantic relationships have. We've spoken about power, but it was interesting to see the ways in which power operates in the space of the intimate. So Neil gets to be hot and cold. Often cis-het men get to dictate the cadence and the tempo of the relationship. If he asks you out, then you're easy, and all these other pejoratives that get used for women. But I am so curious about latent power and how often women themselves give space to this power in their romantic relationships, right? Because we see how Neil acts when he has power with people that he respects. His comrades, he will rush whenever they call him. He considers those relationships important and treats them a particular way. But he blows hot and cold with Anita. He is possessive, he's callous, he has no respect for her. So much of his behavior, I think, is driven by the knowledge that he's got this latent power because he's a man and he's the prize. I wanted to speak about that because that particular interaction was jarring to see, but jarring to also know that it's real. You've seen it in relationships that you have been in or relationships that other people have been in. You know that it's a real way of interacting.
I also wanted to say, just to add to this, there's also a lot of love bombing, right? Neil's hot is very hot. And Neil's cold is extremely cold, right? So there's also a lot of love bombing that I'm just like, okay, my darling, but you're like, oh, wow. So yeah, Alma, in addition to what you're saying, also the problem of love bombing.
Yes, you are correct. There's the love bombing and the power. A lot of this also comes from Twitter, Instagram, TikTok videos, and relationship gurus on social media. This didn't exist maybe 5 years ago. A phrase I'm seeing a lot is there's something, lean into your sacred feminism. And I'm just, what is this? And let the masculine be the masculine. Sometimes there's a thing of, oh, if you're independent, your energy is too masculine. And I'm just like, we all have masculine and feminine energies within us. And I think even just to think about those two as binary is a very big problem. And I just see all this relationship advice of let men lead. And I'm just wondering, like, where's this stuff coming from? It's as if the feminist movement didn't exist at all. We're so retrogressive. I just wanted to explore that a little bit. And I think also this question of a man who's a powerful man and who is very invested in his patriarchal power, and he knows exactly how it works and exactly how to use it. And he not only has patriarchal power, but he has the money to back it up and the status. These are the three things. We have a lot of patriarchs and maybe they're poor. They don't have money and cars and stuff like that, but they can still patriarch. But when you have societal status, money, and patriarchal power, it's a really deadly combination. Look at someone like Donald Trump. That's like the uber patriarch. He's got money. Men who are patriarchs know other men they have to bow down to and placate. Patriarchy is a hierarchy, and God is at the top. And so there's always, even if you're a very rich man and you're a very powerful man, there's always going to be someone above you. And so I've seen it. I've been in rooms where men who have been ruthlessly powerful, a man walks in who is above them in the hierarchy, and they regress to a childlike state. And and it's the first time I saw it, I was like, this whole patriarchy thing is smoke and mirrors. And it's fascinating to me because you can see a very powerful man and then who's, when they're invested fully in patriarchy, will see another powerful man, and his whole demeanor will change, and the way he talks, and even his body language will change. But then he'll get that power back by asserting it over a woman or a child or someone he considers a lesser man. And so for me, I've just seen it happen so often, and it's always fascinating to me how, and even with my son, who's now 27, he grew up with me. So he grew up with gender studies basically being forced down his throat. And he often says to me, it's been really interesting to grow from boyhood, and he's cisgender. And there's sometimes when he comes into interactions with men who are older, but because they view him in a certain light, there's a difference. He can see when a man respects him or doesn't respect him. He can feel it immediately. And some of these men are men that he's known since he was a boy. And he's just like, wow, this is crazy. Because like when I was a boy, they completely ignored me. I didn't exist. And now I'll walk into a room and they'll be like, hey. And this is how our social relations work. These relations then also, when people want to feel powerful or want to feel better about themselves, who can I go lord it over? It's very common.
And
I completely haven't answered the question.
I think that you've spoken about the ways in which Neil is bowing to some men outside in the political realm because he wants to be part of the party, the big speaker. He's stripped off some form of power. And so he's needing to get some form of power. It seems he gets it in how he treats these women. Before we leave, the one question that I have is this a happy ending?
I don't know.
What is a happy ending?
Well, on the one hand, we think about like ideas of justice and people get what they deserve, right? And so from that perspective, you like Neil ultimately having to answer for the things he's done. It's a happy ending, right? But Anita, my girl, toiled, my lovey. She toiled to be walking out of a house with no car, with the clothes on her back. Nah. I'm just like, hold up. She's free from this crap.
BMW.
To be free, but to be able to walk out alive, we know how Neil behaves. So the fact that she's able to walk out of there in the fullness of who she is important, because in so many ways you see a reclamation. And I think that was a happy ending because you see Anita in some ways come back to herself in the way that she knows herself to be. And that is one of the most... That is one of the most powerful things that women can do, is to say there are societal ideas of who I should be and what my life should look like, and I choose to rebel against those for the sake of who I know myself to be. That is freedom. There is no greater freedom than to be free from the idea of what other people think you should be. She does that. She shakes it off. She could be the comrade's wife. She could have kept quiet. She could have assumed power. She shakes it off and she walks out of that house with nothing but her dignity. Tell me that's not a happy ending.
I don't know if I'm that virtuous, right? Because I'm just like, Anita, girl, you've been through a lot to just be walking away with your dignity.
If you think I'm judging, it's because I am.
No, judge me, please, because that's
if you think I'm judging you, it's because I am judging you, Litlokonolo.
Professor Boswell.
No, you want the soft life for Anita.
Yes! She deserves it.
Soft life for the public first.
Remember, Anita had to be sitting and reading word for word what her husband was doing to other people. Oh, and just she walks away with her dignity.
She knew what he was doing. And I think much of what Barbara is saying is also like, what of our disbelief do we suspect for the people that we love? When he blows hot and cold, when he ignores her, when he doesn't reply, when he disappears, in her spirit, she knows that what he's doing is inappropriate, which is why she goes to read his messages, which is why she starts being a detective. Once you start being a detective in a relationship, it's because once you start being the FBI, it's because knows she's not with Jonathan because she knows. And so you pretend that this just, oh my God, I just can't believe this, is not true. And I think the ending is good because there's a confrontation of self that Anita has to do, right? There is this veil that's lifted. There is this breaking of the wall. And she's like, okay, now that I've gone FBI, I've sleuthed, I've read the messages, I have cleansed myself of my disbelief. I get to walk out of this with my dignity. There's a dignity in leaving things that make you behave outside of who you know yourself to be. And once you start acting like a detective in a relationship, man.
Yeah, it's already over when you get to the point of.
We are Jola 99.
Because why are you sleuthing?
Forensic.
Sherlock. Do you know what I mean? Now you're taking location. Stop.
There's a part in the book where Anita reflects on her mom telling her to stop analyzing and live in the moment, right? For me, I think of often when people say you are insecure, sometimes it's a gut feel that something is just not right. And I feel like Anita from the beginning, my girl, that's why I was saying she thought it was a carnival, but it was red flags all the way because, wow, FBIing. But for me, I'm just saying, I hear the feminist in me is like, yeah, she left with her dignity, but the baddie is like she should have left with more.
I don't know how to answer that. It's again with the principles versus the desire. So maybe she desires to leave with more, but then her principles kick in. Maybe that's just too simplistic. Maybe there could have been other things that she did. She could have done many other things. She had options, right? She had many options. But the point is like by the end of it, we see her enmeshed in these institutions. There's the political institution, there's the university as an institution, there's marriage as an institution. By the end, she's institutionless, not to give away, but okay, let's give it away.
She is.
She's just like I think that's my own personal belief. And I think it's reflected in Anita and in that how she tackles this, is that there was a time when maybe I thought institutions were going to save me, or I looked to institutions for redress, for justice, for social justice, and is maybe just reflective of my own, that institutions aren't going to save us. They're not going to save us from ourselves, and they're not going to save us from predators and abusers and powerful people who are not acting ethically. Yeah, that's what I think.
That's deep.
Now that you're pushing me on that, because I don't really want to. I just thought I need to get this character out of this situation because I've put her in a lot, and it's like this thing of I care about her and I care about what happens to her, and I want her to be okay.
Sure, this was such a powerful conversation. Thank you so much, Barbara. I think you can tell that the Tlokonolo and I absolutely love the book. Anita she put me through a lot in this book, but she's still my girl. But I think that this book was powerful because I think the fact that we have such strong feelings and strong opinions is reflective of the ways in which you manage to convey so clearly and so beautifully so many of that we've spoken to, but also of the questions that you ask the reader that required us to stretch our imaginations, to stretch our ideas of self, to ask ourselves about our feminist politics and what they look like in relationships, and that's a powerful thing to do. So congratulations. We are excited to see what this book will do. And we can't wait to see what all the other books that you have in you are going to do as well. So thank you so much. And we are really looking forward to seeing what the Comrade's Wife will do. So everybody, get your copy of The Comrade's Wife. Please don't be asking for PDFs and free copies. Don't let the devil use you. Go and buy yourself a copy of the book. Don't allow yourself to be an agent of Satan. But thank you so much, Barbara. We really did enjoy this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a very delightful conversation and for pushing me to answer difficult questions. Thank you. I love this.
So much, Cheeky Natives, and thank you so much, Professor Boswell, for really what is an incredible book. And Alma said, we can't wait to talk to you about all the books that will come out of you. Until next time, Cheeky Natives, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Cheeky Natives. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and rate the podcast on all your streaming platforms.